Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, the craft and more. I'm your host Edith, and for this episode I'm joined by two guests, Emma Woodhouse and Caroline Ailanthus. Hello ladies and welcome to the show.
Hello.
And I have to say, Caroline is to blame that you have to be here with me at this moment because she wrote me an email and she suggested I shall have you both on the show since we're talking about historic fiction or nonfiction, also in your case, Emma. And I always think historic fiction is a splendid idea to talk about. So, ladies, how did it all start? You said before I started the recording, you met before and you had a great chat. So, how came that about? Who would like to go first? Caroline. Caroline, okay. Oh? The internet. I think. Again, my question. I asked you, Caroline, how did you two meet and how did it all start?
Well, I had such a good time being interviewed on, other people's podcasts and so forth. I decided to start interviewing people for my blog. And so I put out a call on social media. Any writers want to be interviewed. And Emma said yes, among other people. So we did an interview and it was a lot of fun. So that's what happened.
Okay. Yep. About historic fiction, because you said that's down your lane at the moment, because I know you have written sci-fi, science fiction with a lot of science in it, and you said the new one is also again science, but also there is a strong historic thread in it. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that and tell us more about your book? You said part 1 is already out and we have it here in the scene for you.
Yes. I wouldn't call Elf historical fiction exactly. It's high fantasy is what it is. But most of the characters are based on real historical people. A lot of the plot is based on historical things. Not all the same historical things. There are people from different time periods who end up at parties together. It's not that the historical people literally show up as them. It's that these are fictional people with, similar personalities, similar lives in this very different context. Mostly these are people from the mid-19th century America. Some are not. Some are from elsewhere. I have people from Irish history. It varies. So I've had to do a lot of historical research in order to do that and really understand, okay, what was happening at these times and places? Who were these people? In order to write this, fictional high fantasy with, elves and odd animals and sort of pseudo-Roman something or other and all of that stuff.
Okay. It's interesting. You said, 19th century American historic fiction. We are also in the 19th century with Emma's books. I'm currently reading the Prendergast Watch.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and it sucked me in from the beginning. I'm a sucker for historic fiction, like I said at the beginning, and it's absolute great. You set the tone and you set the scene. It's absolutely wonderful. But there is a new one out
Yes.
called Mercy. And am I right to say that it is nonfiction, but you wrote it in a way that one could read it sort of as fiction?
Yeah, that's right. So Mercy was a real person. So she was arrested in 1848. So I researched her life in depth and created a scrapbook, which I've got it here actually. Created a big scrapbook full of all my research. I don't know if you can see that. I did regret it being a small scrapbook. I would have liked it to have been bigger because I ended up filling it and then some. But and so once I'd done that, I created a novel from that. So everything you read in Mercy really happened, and anything that I've had to sort of fabricate just to keep the story going, I put in the author's notes at the back, just so that people know what's history and what's not. Because a lot of historical novels have other bits in there, or bits that the authors altered to make the story arc or whatever. So as much as possible, I've not altered a thing. And that's the way my writing's going, really, in a very sort of either non-fiction or incredibly factual novels. That's the way it's going, yeah. So you're reading the Prendergast Watch was my very first novel, which is complete fiction. And then after that, I wrote a novel that I found a real person to go into it to interact with my main character, and that was called Simple Twists of Fate. And then from that, I then got obsessed with this real person that I'd found who was a Victorian gang boss. And I researched her life, Mary Carr, and I wrote Mary, Queen of the 40. And then I got obsessed with all the research and remembered how much I love the research, found Mercy, researched Mercy, wrote Mercy. And my next book that comes out will be a non-fiction, again about Mary Carr, because I'd got so much research done about her that I thought there's a non-fiction book here as well. So my next book that comes out is going to be a non-fiction. So it's, I think the way I'm going now, it will be sort of non-fiction and the novels about the real people that are incredibly factually based.
And how long did you give yourself time for the research before you started writing?
I think I probably researched for around a year before I started writing Mercy. And then the thing about historical research is quite often you think you've done it and you think, oh, I've got it all now, and then more pops up. So that is what happens. And although I do know a lot obviously about Mercy, and I know exactly what happened and when, there are still documents that I come across in the archives. For example, I went to the archives in Shrewsbury on Thursday last week and was holding in my hand the coroner's bill from the coroner's inquiry linked to the murder that Mercy was arrested for. And even though I knew it existed, I'd never seen it with my eyes and held it in my hands. And, so I'm still getting to know that sort of the paperwork even more, and the research is still coming out. And I've had a tour of the house where she was arrested since since the book came out. So I'm still very obsessed with these people. I don't think it will ever, because you spend so much time researching them. I'm sure Caroline feels the same I know Caroline feels the same about her people as well. And they are part of your life for so long, and you can't just say goodbye to them at the end. You carry them with you.
Yeah, I can imagine it. Caroline, do you also have a scrapbook?
I don't have a physical scrapbook, but I don't really have to take notes because I have a weirdly accurate memory for certain kinds of things, not other kinds of things, unfortunately. But so I've read dozens of books. I haven't gotten to read any like original documents in their original form, but I've done a lot of reading, and I still have most of the book. So if I need to look something up, I can.
Yep.
And I have all of the books that I've read written down so that I know where I need to go if I need to look something up again.
And the next question would be, since you love research, all the authors who write historic fiction say they love research. I suppose you have to if you want to write historic fiction, because you get everything right. Like I said before, in your book, Emma, the scenes you set, I mean, you feel absolutely as if you entered through a door when I opened the book and you stepped into 19th century London. The question is the danger of falling into the rabbit hole, not getting lost in research. How do you do that? I mean, you said you give yourself about a year to research before you start writing. Was there ever the danger of falling into it and not getting to be in front of your computer and starting writing?
Yeah, I think that there was a point where I thought, well, how do I start? Because I had so much, and I had to pick a starting point for say Mercy. I had to think, where do I start this book, and how do I organise this book? Because you end up with Mercy, I ended up with research that kind of dated from about 1809 up until about 1892. So that's a lot of research, and it spanned members of her family as well. So it wasn't, I'd found out about her uncle, and I'd found out about her cousins, and I found out about, and also the social history at the time in the area that the alleged murder occurred, fed into that story as well. So you've got research on so many different levels, and there did come a point when I thought, I've got to start writing this, and I've got to make a choice about. But one of the hard things about getting started as well is, because you become so attached to these people, you want to do right by them.
Yeah.
So you have to think, well, in so many ways, you have to think about it as a writer. You have to think about it as somebody who cares now about these people that you've never met, that are long since dead. So you want to do right with them. You want to hook the reader in still. So you've got all these considerations to make when you start writing that book, on so many different levels. So yeah, it can, and you can end up, like you say, falling down a wormhole of, oh, this is interesting, I'll just look into that. So sometimes you do have to put your brakes on and go, this is what we need. This is what we need. But when it came to writing my nonfiction book that's coming out, obviously I did a lot of research to write Mary, Queen of the 40, which was my novel about Mary Carr. And then I did feel that I'd got lots and lots of research, wanted to write a nonfiction book. That gave me the opportunity to go down a lot of wormholes. And I indulge myself in that and put it all into a book, because I could then have the time to research people she interacted with and other villains and sort of the naughty people that she knew, and really find out about them and really get into that stuff that just wouldn't fit into the novel. We didn't have time for it in the novel, but so I've indulged myself in that way.
Yeah, one has to. I think one has to. One is allowed to. Yeah. Caroline, you have to tackle more than one base. You not only had to tackle the historic base, you also had to tackle the science and fantasy base. How did you go about that?
Well, the science, I had that in place already. I drew on things from what I already know. The science component.
You said fantasy you had already tackled this base. So
although I did need to do a little bit of research for that. Where the fantasy comes in the book is the background world building, because
did I read, or did I understand it correct, Emma, that Mercy, there is some connection to your family, or did I get that wrong?
No, there's not a connection to my family, but she's from the town that I live in.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, come on. She is back again, or not? Okay. You're back again, Caroline. Caroline, I will also send you a Zoom link just in case.
Okay.
If you freeze again, come on. Why is that taking so long? Alter Verwalter. Sorry about that. Okay. No, just let me. What is it? What is going on here? Come on. Why is it not working?
Glad it's not live.
Oh, we had problems live as well. Don't mention it. Come on. Why is this shit not working? Sorry about. Let's try it this way. Just get rid of Zoom in Zoom and try it now. Okay. Good. Where were we? Yes, we were with the fantasy base in your book.
Okay. The more I think about it, the more I did have to do research for the fantasy component. And as I keep getting cut off when I try and say, the science part of the fantasy is world building. I want realistic geology. I want realistic ecology. I want all of the fantastic beasts in this fantasy story are actually ice age mammals that didn't go extinct in this world. And so I needed to look up all of that. My mother's a geologist. She's helping me with that component. But the way I avoid going down the rabbit hole is, this is something I learned when I in my undergrad college program, because it was all independent study and you had to plan your study at the beginning of the semester. And I'm frozen again, aren't I?
Yes,
Did I
but
freeze?
but we could hear you. Don't worry.
You can still hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So you had to plan 6 months of research and writing and whatever at the beginning of each semester. So I learned how to do that. And I decided, okay, I'm going to read these particular books. I'm going to talk to my mother about these kinds of questions about geology. I'm going to need to look up this material online. Basically put together a to-do list. And when the to-do list is done, I can start writing. And of course, I find more stuff along the way. I run into questions I hadn't thought of before, and I need to go find them, or I stumble upon interesting information and that changes things. But I'm already writing. I'm not holding up the writing part in order to do the research anymore because I completed that to-do list.
Mm. I think wasn't it Hilary Mantel who did the same. She researched for a year and then she sat down and wrote her book.
Yeah, I think she did.
Yeah, and you said scrapbooks, and you discovered something new again and again, Emma. But when you started writing, there is always the question: how do you decide what to put in this book you are currently writing and what to leave out? Maybe keep it for a later date. How do you decide that? How do you decide? Okay, I will use that, leave out that. Do not overwhelm the reader with too much information, just making sure I got everything right, to get, like I said before, the scenes right, the tone right.
With Mercy, I think I was very lucky in that I didn't really need to leave anything out. What I really wanted to do with Mercy was to create this dialogue with readers around her crime that she was accused of, because Mercy was arrested for murder, and she ended up with a coroner's inquiry and 3 trials as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the professionals back then found it very, very difficult to get a jury to give them a verdict. 2 of her trials came back with no verdict. So what I really wanted to do was to give the reader as much as possible so that in a modern sort of mindset, they could decide what they thought. So with Mercy, I was very lucky in that I didn't really need to leave anything out. With Mary, I did leave certain things out only because there would have, like you say, there would have been too much to go in. But anything that has been left out, or people that I've had to amalgamate because it would be too complicated otherwise, I've again written that in the author's notes at the end, so people always know where I'm coming from. And for me, I find that incredibly hard because I hated not sticking to the reality and sort of what exactly went on. And I that was possibly again another reason why I wanted to write the nonfiction book, because I wanted to set everything on record exactly as it had been. With Mercy, my book definitely does that. And I think that I was very lucky in that her story allowed me to do that. There wasn't sort of multiple lovers, for example, that I would struggle to get all into the book. Whereas with Mary, there was the possibility of that. And so, with Mercy, it was a not a straightforward process, but it was a very much I could put everything into the book. So I feel very satisfied about it as a finished item.
Okay. Again, Caroline, you had to tackle more than one base, and I think she froze again. I asked Caroline. No, yeah, I was about to ask Caroline about her bases again, because we had this conversation before, if I remember correctly, with Sarah about the question of science. How much science shall you put into your book without dumping it down? And again, I suppose that was the question again. You want it all there because it's important to you. It should be there, and trust people to find out if they want to know more. How much or what did you leave out? How do you decide what to leave out when it's important? Science is important. Trust the reader.
Well, science and history, which, they're both in this book. It ends up being different. The science is all there, however much is necessary to build the world, and the same as in my other books. The way I talk about it is a little different because the characters themselves, most of them, don't understand science, and they don't talk about things in that way. So I have to figure out, how do they explain this stuff in terms that make sense for the characters. History is a little bit different because it's all about story, and there's the question of which storylines do I include, which characters do I include, which people do I include as characters. My protagonists, I have 3 protagonists for this book, and they are based on Abraham Lincoln, U.S. Grant, and William Tecumseh Sherman. Not everybody's heard of Sherman. He was like the next level down from Grant in rank of generals on the Union side of the Civil War. He was also arguably Grant's best friend. So I do have to make decisions about how much of these people's stories I'm going to translate into the fictional context. How many other characters, people they knew who were in their lives, am I going to translate? To what extent am I going to replace real things with fiction? Because I can do that. It's not a question of not wanting to include too much history for the reader. In this case, it's too much history for the story, because I do not want to, my research for this thing involved reading multiple 1,000-page books, you know?
Yeah.
So if I put all of it in there, I'd end up, with like 4,000 pages? You can't write a novel that's 4,000 pages long. You can't do that. Nobody would read it. But with that, it's the same thing as with any other novel. It's what fits the plot, what fits the theme, what can I include that preserves the pacing
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. But it's difficult sometimes because I encounter these great historical stories that a lot of people don't know about that I want to include somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And either directly or a fictionalized reference to them. Like Sherman and one of Grant's other friends, John Rawlins. I've read hints that their relationship was kind of weird, that there was some hostility between them after the war. Rawlins was Secretary of War for Grant became president, and Rawlins was his Secretary of War for, I think, several months.
Mm-hmm.
And he made life really hard for Sherman, just got in his way. I kind of detect some personal jealousy there, like they shared a best friend. Like, I should be his best friend. I should be more important to him. No, I should, you know. But when Rollins died, he died when he was only 38 years old of tuberculosis. Sherman was there.
Okay.
Sherman attended his deathbed, and Grant couldn't be there. And Sherman was trying to comfort Rollins because Grant wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
How amazing is that relationship? And I can't figure out how to put it in my book. There's just no room for it, which is really sad. I may have to write more books in order to do this,
Yeah,
It's hard.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is. Do you think after the war, the egos got in the way a little bit between those three? Not just who's the best friend of the president, because we've known each other before, but also the egos. I mean, they were all generals. They were all commanding officers.
Well, Rollins wasn't a general. He was Grant's chief of staff.
Yeah, but still.
In that case, I don't think so. Sherman and Grant were both remarkably humble. I think Rollins was as well. Rollins was entirely dedicated to Grant. He really made taking care of Grant, looking after him, helping him. He made it his life's work.
Okay.
And I don't think anything other than that, and his own family, his wife and children, really mattered to him. Besides helping Grant, and Sherman was very much the same. And Grant, he was very shy. Like he didn't want anybody paying attention to him at all if he could help it. Yeah, he just didn't want a big deal made out of him.
Yeah, but he was the president.
At all.
There was,
What?
He was the president, but people made a big deal.
Yeah, and he put up with it.
Yeah.
But there's a wonderful little story that Sherman tells in his memoir, and I won't repeat the whole story, although it's wonderful. But there was this big to-do that they were at, and Grant was supposed to make a speech. So he wrote a speech But instead of reading it out or reciting it, he handed it to the, master of ceremonies or whatever and sat back down. He wouldn't give his own speech at the event.
Yeah, well,
He got better at that as he got older, and he did make speeches as president and got pretty good at it. But he really wanted people to leave him alone.
unlike other people we know of to date. Not saying who, because let's not mention that. May I ask both of you, why do you think is there such a huge interest, and I think there is a huge interest in history and historic fiction, especially of the Victorian era, be it in books or be it on TV or in films, but also in the case of the United States, quite often nowadays of the era of the Civil War. Why do you think is that, Emma? Let's start with you.
So I think that we're coming to a point now where modern society wants to relearn history almost, because we were taught for a very long time that the Victorian era was very boring and very linked to sort of your social strata, and everybody was very God-fearing, and it was all very boring. In actual fact, it was completely the opposite. We had some incredible sort of, Victorians working out their sexuality and working out things that actually people had to hide away. And their forgotten histories, their hidden histories, if you like. And we've now reached a point in the modern day where we can have these conversations, we can revisit these histories, we can rediscover them. And so you're getting a lot of books where gay history is being sort of explored. And for me, my real goal is forgotten working class women's histories, because a lot of books that are written about the Victorian era, if it's about a woman, she's a young lady who's going to inherit a fortune, generally speaking. And I come from a working class background, and I felt growing up, and I was very into Victorian literature. Even as a child, my sort of parents really kind of fostered that love of reading and Dickens and things. But there was nothing that I could say was anything like my family history going on in any of these books. So for me, when I'm writing, I'm almost uncovering the voices of people who might have been a bit like me. And a lot of contemporary Victorian novels now have these strong female main characters that are stomping around like a modern girl would, which is not historically accurate. There were Victorian women who were, they were bad girls, but they did it in a Victorian bad girl way. It wasn't sort of like, I watched Enola Holmes recently, and she's all sassy and very modern, and it's lovely to see that we can retell these histories in that way, but they're not necessarily historically accurate. But there were women out there, doing their own thing and sort of making a living. And there were gay people having to hide their sexuality. And there were, sort of minority kind of communities that have been almost written out of history, that need discovering and need sort of unearthing. And we're just at a point where we can do that now, I think.
Caroline, what about the Civil War era in the United States? Why is there such a keen interest, do you think? Because that's my impression, because there have been quite a few authors who've written fictional books set in this certain era.
I have two answers to that, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Because the reason why I decided to draw material from that era for my book is different than I think the reason why a lot of other people are interested in it, and both are important. I got interested in the project because I happened to read a book about, among other people, Grant and Sherman, and I'd heard of them before, but I hadn't really understood who they were as people, and I didn't know that they had this amazing friendship.
Mhm.
And I wanted most of my books center friendships in one way or another. Some people write romantic relationships. I tend not to. I write about friendships. And I thought, this is a really interesting friendship. I wonder if I could write something like that. And then the more I found out about these two people individually, the more I liked them. And I've always liked Lincoln, so he got in there too. And so, I mean, the book is supposed to function on one level as just a fantasy. It's the Nanani Empire. There are elves and dwarves, and it is supposed to function on that level. But to the extent to which it is about history, it's almost that I'm rescuing these people from history, because we hear about them as like historical figures in capital letters. Sherman particularly gets the short end of this stick. He is particularly famous for one military campaign in Georgia that took 20 days.
Okay.
20 days out of his entire life, and he lived to be 71 years old. 20 days out of 71 years, and that's what people focus on. And if they think about who Sherman was and what he was about, they think, oh, what kind of person would do this one military campaign? Well, he must have been like fierce and mean and vicious and everything. No, he was not. I want people to see him as people. And maybe if instead of telling people, okay, this is a book about William Tecumseh Sherman, I tell them, oh, this is a book about Gwen, the half-elf. Then they won't know it's about Sherman. It's like, oh, she's really cool. Like, surprise. So that's part of what I was doing, what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But as to why the Civil War era is particularly important, to Americans, it's because it's not over. Yeah, the Civil War was an incredibly traumatic event. Am I frozen? Can you hear me?
No, all good. You're good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, all good.
I'm good? Okay.
Yep.
The Civil War was a tremendously traumatic event for this country, and far more so than anything that's happened since. And the fundamental issues that drove it were not resolved.
Mm-hmm.
The war stopped, which was good.
Mm-hmm.
Slavery was ended, which was good, except then it was sort of unofficially unended. And for decades, it's still not taken care of. There are people who want to undo all of the progress that's been made with that. There are still people who are mad at Sherman for those 20 days.
Okay.
That's how fresh it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not over. So it's like, if something traumatic happens in a life, people will frequently keep dreaming about it, or even having flashbacks to that. And I think that's what we're doing. That the fiction about the Civil War is part of the national dream for
nightmare.
National PTSD.
Okay. Boy, you Americans know how to hold a grudge, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's even worse than what we do here in Europe. And let's be honest here. The British would have a lot of reason to hold a grudge against the Germans, wouldn't they? I mean,
yeah, but we don't. We love you guys.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we Austrians, do we love the Germans? I'm not so sure about that, Yeah, we like them.
You
but
like them.
yeah, we like them. they can be annoying, but we don't hold a grudge. I mean, and you said it's a trauma. It's some people's nightmare even. And given what is going on, I would also say, yeah, you're not done with it.
What's happening in the United States politically now, I think, is another battle of the Civil War.
Yeah.
It's in different ways, it's the same. I don't want to go into full analysis here. That's not really the point. But it's not over.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to deal with it. And fiction is one of the ways that a culture deals with something.
Yeah.
Like, I've heard that in Japan, the Godzilla movies, Godzilla is about the atom bomb. That's what Godzilla is about. I mean, in America, Godzilla becomes this fun monster movie, whatever. But in Japan, I've heard it's something else. It's Japan trying to deal with, like, holy cow, what happened to us?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that fiction, including fantasy, is one way that cultures try to cope.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Emma, would you say that it's of course different for the United Kingdom, for Britain, for England, because there wasn't that major war. I mean, there were skirmishes all over the world since Great Britain was dominating the world at the time. But would you say that when people look at the Victorian era, it's more about the social fabric of the country that they keep coming back to, what they want to understand, because there's a lot happening. There's a lot of change, economic change, social change, in a good way, but also in a bad way. That's sort of your trauma, the one you want to work on. Unlike, let's say, for the Americans with the war, the social changes in your country.
Yeah, I think that, like you say, the Victorian era was a time of great change. We've got the Industrial Revolution that kind of brought about masses of change. And particularly in rural areas of the UK, things stayed very Victorian for a very long time. So even sort of during the First and Second World War, and even after then, particularly in rural communities, people were still living as if it was the Victorian age. So I think in various parts of the UK, the Victorian era seems quite close still. Socially, again in the UK, there were parts of the UK that were very, very cut off from what was going on. When you think about the British Empire, there would have been many, many people who really hadn't got a clue about what that meant, because they were focused on getting the crops in and sort of, very, very sort of basic day-to-day living for a very long time. And I think that, like I said before, these histories that kind of we're starting to tell now that had been forgotten. Things like Black history and things like gay history and the history of those forgotten sort of people that just went day to day. They're massively important because I think they're people's roots. And for me, I think people go back to it because of that desire to know their roots. And for a long, long time, for generations, many people's roots have just been glossed over in literature. And like Caroline said, fiction is a fantastic platform where we can explore things and we can have dialogue through a piece of fiction that we might not necessarily have face to face with somebody else. So, it's a safe space for us to explore some quite traumatic issues. And yeah, like Caroline said, it is absolutely the perfect place and the perfect sphere to do that.
And also the perfect sphere, like you said, Emma, to give people a voice who didn't have a voice back then. Make them seen, in a way they weren't seen back then?
Yeah. So there's a way of writing that has been used in accounts of fictionalization accounts of slavery and trying to kind of fill the gaps in that are left, so the archives don't tell us everything. There are gaps in history. So through critical fabulation, what happens is we do the archival research, we find those gaps, and then we try to fill them in an ethical manner in order to tell stories that have been forgotten. So even when we're writing about somebody who's not like my ladies that I write about, I've got archival records coming out my ear holes for them, but there are histories out there where there is very little or nothing to be found. And so piecing together stories and trying to tell them through with sort of ethical storytelling, I think is a growing sort of literary not trend, because it would have to be way more prolific for it to be a trend, but a growing literary practice, if you like, in order to tell these forgotten stories. And really important to give these people a voice.
Is it important then? Now I'm putting or playing the devil's advocate to put a trigger warning on these concepts you just mentioned. Also in Caroline's case, since we're talking about trauma of the past and how it still affects people today, one way or the other.
I think if you start putting trigger warnings on history, you could put a trigger warning on anything. You've got murder and mystery books that are really quite gruesome, that are best-selling, that everybody's reading them. You'd have to put a trigger warning on literally everything. So I think really probably not necessary.
Okay. Caroline, should we put a trigger warning on your book then?
Absolutely not. There are people who put trigger warnings on novels and books and whatever. My personal opinion is that is based on a misunderstanding of what a trigger is. You know, a trauma trigger is something that reactivates clinical PTSD. And these can be intensely personal. It's not to be triggered is not the same thing as to be upset. No matter how upset you are, it's not the same. It's an apples and oranges to being triggered. I think I have some PTSD. I'm not going to get into for what or why, but the triggers for it are weird. Like playing music in a darkened bedroom at bedtime, to go to sleep to. I can't stand that. My husband wanted to go to sleep to music once, and I told him, okay, I'm going to go out in the living room. When your music is done, I'll come to bed. Not until. I got really freaked out. How are you going to put a warning on that? With each person who might have trauma, or like the entire society as a whole might have trauma, how are you going to predict what's going to trigger something and what? And people are like, oh, yeah, well, there's some things that are going to trigger everybody. No, there's some things that are going to upset everybody, or some things that are going to offend everybody, and that's different. You can survive being offended. You can survive being upset. In certain contexts, it's good for you. If you get offended or upset by certain parts of history, you know what? Good. That means that's a good sign. You should be. Being triggered is not good. It doesn't help anything or anybody, but pretending that, this book might upset a few people is going to protect people who are traumatized from. You're just pretending. It's a false sense of security. So absolutely not. And my feeling too is that when you pick up a book, if you can't tell that book is going to have something in it that might be offensive or upsetting to somebody, then that means that the people who want that offensive or upsetting material, like, oh, I want to read about a murder mystery, or I want to read, what happened in those 20 days where Sherman pissed everybody in the South off on purpose. What did he do? I want to read about that. If you can't tell from looking at the book that it has that material in it, then the book's not being advertised right. and you're leaving readers, you're leaving money on the table, basically.
Yeah.
If you can't tell. So trigger warnings as such don't help, and if you need a content warning, you're marketing the book wrong. That's my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there is, from the reader's point of view, a bigger market these days for your kinds of books? I mean, fantasy is at the moment, I would say, in high regard. Also crime fiction, but historic crime fiction, I would say so too.
I hope so. I mean, I don't choose what I'm going to write based on what's going to sell. I'm not that practical.
I don't know if it's...
I hope so.
Yeah, well, practical. I mean, Jeffrey Deaver once said, I heard him say that at an event, he said he's looking at the market and then he's writing for the market. But that's not for everyone. And I talked to authors who said, I would never write just for the market. I write this kind of story, or I write about this character because that's what I want to write. That's what interests me. That's my book. And yeah, take it or leave it. Emma, what is your opinion on this?
So, I personally write what I want to write. When I had an agent, I was advised, when I wrote the Prendergast Watch that you're reading now, and obviously in that book I intended there to be really 4 main characters, 2 men, 2 women. And I was advised to have 1 strong female main character, which, as you can imagine from what I was talking about earlier on about modern characters stomping around in Victorian novels as if they own the place, did not sit well with me. So what I did was, for my second book, which I wrote on the back of that feedback, I did put in a strong female main character, but when I started researching and finding people for her to interact with, I actually found a strong Victorian real female, Mary Carr, who would be strong in a Victorian way. And so I made sure that my main character, although she's a strong female character, she's strong in a historical way, not in a modern way. And then that's led me into writing about strong real women, but they don't act the same way as modern women do, because they just didn't. But I think there's definitely there's a massive market at the moment, I think, for crime. There's a massive market for thriller. There's a massive market for fantasy and what they're calling romantasy.
Yeah.
And they're huge. That's a huge market. But I personally can't write anything that I'm not interested in myself. So when I was asked if there was a possibility for me to put more romance into books, at first I just sort of went a little bit, and sort of tried to glance the story away from that as quickly as possible and onto something else. Because that's not what I write, and that's not what I'm into writing. And so I'm not a commercial writer. I write what I want to write.
Yeah, absolutely understandable. And may I ask both of you, actually, have you caught yourself imposing modern ideas on your historic characters? Because we can't look at the past with eyes of the past. You know what I mean? We look at the past with modern eyes. So have you caught yourself falling into the trap of, like you said, letting your characters act in a modern way, although you want them to act in a Victorian way or Civil War era way? Did you catch yourself?
I mean, again, my setting, although I'm borrowing a lot from the Civil War era, the setting itself is not Civil War, and there are things that I wanted to be true for this made up society that I haven't been able to pull off. I mean, the book is what it is. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the result. I'm saying that it's different than what I went in planning because, I wanted the society to be pre-scientific and, to have a sort of ambiguity and tolerance of paradox that we tend not to have. I thought that would be very interesting. And you know what? I couldn't. My characters are, they're pretty 19th century in that respect, but they're not because that's into the scientific age.
Yeah.
But I couldn't really pull off writing characters who don't have a mindset influenced by science. There are some places where I have characters from a different imaginary culture who have been through the scientific revolution and have a lot of ideas that are really modern. So I have some interesting conversations between characters who just, you have the secondary character saying things that my primary that the reader should be able to know what they're talking about. But the main character is just like, wait, what? A small example, there's in this imaginary society, most people use a number system that doesn't include zero. It doesn't have a concept of zero. But there is a specialized form of they did borrow a form of mathematics from the elves, and the military uses that. So in the first part of the book, there's this brief scene where Gwen is at the military academy and she's introduced to the concept of zero. And she's thinking, okay, it means nothing. How can it mean nothing? And how is that different than just not meaning anything? Well, the reader gets it. The reader knows.
Yeah.
But she doesn't. And then there are other more important ones, like the subject of mental health comes up. And like the whole idea of you treat this with compassion and interest and dignity, it's just sort of alien.
Yeah.
And so you have conversations between people who are just like, wow, they're crazy, whatever. And other people are like, no, it's mentally ill. And it's supposed to look sort of odd. It's supposed to look like, wait, you're having these conversations from different historical eras here. What's going on?
Yeah.
So that's been interesting.
Emma, did you catch yourself imposing something on your characters?
I think when I was working with my agent, there were points where I was part of my feedback might have been to kind of make them a bit more modern, because I think my problem was that I write in quite naturally. I suppose I've read a lot of Dickens and read a lot of classics, and when I started writing my fiction, that's really where I was at with my mindset of where I wanted my characters to be. And I think some of the feedback was almost that they were slightly too Dickensian for the modern reader. But when it comes to my my women like Mercy and Mary, I had reams and reams and reams of newspaper reports about them. So I could actually read how they spoke, and I could actually read about their antics and how they behaved. And that really helped me to have those primary sources that were from their lives that told me exactly what they were like as people. So I think as well, another thing that I do is I edit a hell of a lot. So my books once they're written, the first draft, I tear them to shreds again. I've changed books from first person to third person, from past tense to present tense, vice versa, alternated points of views, written new points of views in because I wanted to hear from this character's point of view. So I do so much of that as well, that the process for me is very much immersing myself, I think, in the Victorian era. And luckily for my reading habits in the past, I think that's really helped. So I haven't really found them doing too much that was modern. I've probably been, in parts, had to pull myself back from being massively historical. And I know that some people, some of the feedback I've got is about how people talk, particularly in new novels that I'm writing now. So I'm currently doing a master's degree in contemporary creative writing, and one of the things that other students don't seem to be able to stand is that back in Victorian times, people often referred to children as it, not he or she, but it. And if ever I put an it instead of a he or a she into someone's dialogue because they're talking about a child, that is always feedback I get from some. No, it is never allowed to sit like that. I'm not allowed to call the child an it, even though back then it was historically accurate. And it's just little things like that that I will put into my writing that lots of modern readers don't like. But it's how they spoke.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could stand it. I mean, children should be seen but not heard. Don't know what's wrong with that, but seriously. It's interesting what you just said about your writing process. What do you feel the most comfortable with? Because changing from first person to third person, past tense and present tense, it's not, I mean, it's completely, for me as a reader, it's completely different, and completely different how it feels when I'm reading the book. What is for you the part where you feel most comfortable with? Third person, first person?
So when I started writing, so the book you're reading at the moment, The Prendergast Witch, there's a whole story about how that came to be written, and that came to be written because I wanted to read a particular book that was in the present tense. And I'd read so much Dickens, so many classics that are all third person past tense, and I picked up this book, and it was a book called The Crimson Petal and the White by Michael Faber, and it was written in the present tense. So it's set in Victorian times, it's historical fiction, but it's set in it's written in the present tense, and I couldn't read it. I could not read this book because it was in the present tense, and I desperately wanted to read it, but my brain just couldn't cope. So what I did was I decided I'm going to write a book that's in the present tense, and I'm going to make it a quality book. I'm going to write quality sentences, historical, and then I'm going to have to try and force myself to develop this love of the present tense because I really want to read that book. And that's why The Prendergast Watch was written in the first place. It initially started because I was such a classical literature fan that I couldn't read the book I wanted to read because of the tense it was written in. And by the time I'd written The Prendergast Watch, I absolutely loved writing in the present tense, and it became my go-to. But then when, by my third book, I think it's by my third book, because I started to write from different people's perspectives quite in earnest, and I wanted there to be a different sort of narrative voice for each. Then I started to have somebody's part. You tend to find, so in Mary, Queen of the 40, and probably in Mercy as well, you've got the main characters, probably their parts are present tense because we're in the moment with them. And then, for example, in Mercy, we've got the point of view of the chap who was part of her prosecution, who was also a local MP and a local landowner and had known her family. And his is written in the past tense, first person. So I've started I've integrated in my more recent books different sort of third person, first person, depending on whose point of view we're looking at. And I found that worked really well because for one character, it would work past tense, first person. Another character, it works third person, present tense. And it depends on their ego, or it depends on their, sort of who's the main character really, and who's so it's kind of determined by the character now. Whereas to begin with, literally, I wrote the book that you're reading because I wanted to read another book that was in the present tense.
Okay, interesting. Caroline, what do you feel most comfortable with when you write your characters, your stories?
In general, third person past tense. I haven't written anything long in present tense. I'm not sure I will. I don't know. We'll see. I have an unpublished novel, not quite finished, but close, that is in first person. And that's really interesting. For that, I chose first person because the character is genderqueer and has a very androgynous presentation. And can you still hear me? You've all frozen.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. So I wanted the writing with they them pronouns is really difficult. If those are the pronouns that somebody wants me to use for them, I absolutely will. If I'm inventing a person, I'm less likely to give them they them pronouns because it just makes writing harder.
It makes reading harder.
So I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to give this character either masculine or feminine pronouns because then that would affect what the reader imagined. So I said, well, if it's first person, I don't need to gender the pronouns at all. True. So I did that, and the character's voice just expanded, and it just became this very rich thing of describing the story from the character's own viewpoint. With Elf, the vast majority of it is in third person. There are some passages that are letters that the characters write, so that's first person because it's somebody writing the letter. There are also some passages that are sort of unstable. Sherman gives every evidence, as far as I can tell, of being neurodivergent. And I wanted Gwen to do that as well, and that being able to skip from one topic to another very quickly, not staying on one thing at a time unless she happens to be obsessed with it right now, in which case she can't help it, and all of that. So in order to show that about her personality, the passages of the book that are from her viewpoint are deliberately erratic. There's no connective tissue between scenes. It's just scene. There are passages that are kind of distant third-person perspective, and then there are passages that are very close first-person perspective. There are passages that are first person. They're just her train of thought, and there's no warning to the reader what it's going to be from passage to one passage to the other, because I'm trying to show how her mind works, that just skip in a way that works for her and maybe doesn't work for other people. So that's an interesting thing that I'm doing, having the point of view be deliberately unstable in order to show something about a character.
May I also ask how lenient you were with the things you put in the book or the things you described in your book? from a historic point of view, the creative license, so to speak? Did you make use of it at all? Or you, Caroline? Emma, maybe not so much. I'm not so sure about that. But do you feel you did use it at one time, at one point? Caroline?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, you have to. Caroline, let's start with you this time. Yeah?
I have to, partly in order to, to make it be a novel, to make it be a fantasy novel.
Okay.
I didn't want to just sort of write biography and pretend I wasn't. That didn't sit right.
Okay.
There are some changes that I made to adapt to the setting. There are some changes that I made to adapt to the fact that it's a novel. Combining characters and things like that. There are, let's see, there are some places where characters, even Gwen, Gwen is not Sherman with a different name. She is very much like Sherman. And if you like her, then you'll like Sherman.
Okay.
But she's a different person, and that's okay. And I kind of go with that. And then there are little things that just, I don't know. I don't know how to explain why in some cases I kept things as close to history as I could.
Okay.
And in other cases, I just didn't. Like, Sherman's father died when he was 9 years old. I mean, when Sherman was 9 years old, not the father, obviously. Gwen's father died when she was 4. Why did I change it? I don't know. It just felt right.
Okay.
Now, if I were writing a genuine historical novel and saying, like, this is a true story, I would not use that license the same way. And I would do what Emma's done, and where I had to depart for whatever reason, I would say so. And I would do that because accuracy is important to me. But I figure, I already have elves. That's kind of gonna tip the reader off that and then I can do fun things that are just, like there is a part. The historical person, Admiral David Porter, just did not interest me creatively. So I didn't model a character after him. His place is taken by a character modeled after Grace O'Malley, the Irish pirate queen. And yes, there is a scene which has nothing whatever to do with history, where all 3 of my protagonists attend a party aboard the flagship of this character who's based on Grace O'Malley. And the kind of music and dancing is just really strictly modern. I'm imagining, I don't say it this way, but I'm imagining Celtic punk. So then I have this scene where characters based on Abraham Lincoln and William Tecumseh Sherman are dancing to Celtic punk aboard Grace O'Malley's flagship. Like, what?
Why not?
How fun is that?
Yeah. I mean, they enjoyed
But
it.
I get to do that because it's fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and absolutely. You can do that. You're allowed to do that. But I wouldn't worry so much about the elves, That's a thing Lilja Sigurdardóttir said, because in one of her crime fiction novels that take place in Iceland, there are elves, of course, and there is a tiger. You know what people were wondering about? Do you have a guess? It wasn't the elves. It was the tiger. Yeah, well, there you have it. Don't worry about the elves. Just saying. Emma, what about you? Is there a teeny tiny bit of creative license you took?
Possibly. I have been I've been quite a stickler. I think one of the things that I like to argue about fictional historical writing is that swearing. So the Victorians would have cussed. They would have used a lot of swear words, particularly the sorts of Victorians that I like to write about. And some of the feedback I've had was such and such a swear word was not considered a word until such and such a date when it was noted down. This was now a swear word. And I thought, but how long does it take for a word to be used and used and used through classes who are illiterate? Swearing using this word for probably a very, very long time before one of the higher classes picks up this word and then is disgusted by it and ignores it for many, many years and before writing it down.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, swearing, which is not so much in Mercy, she did cuss a little bit, not necessarily so much in Mary, but the Prendergast Watch, I'm currently working on the prequel. And the prequel is a lot darker, dingier, swearier, and all the rest of it, because it's about the Prendergast brothers, who is the very old evil uncle in the Prendergast Watch and his dead brother. And it's about their youth and what they were like and how it all sort of happened. And so the one brother, Jasper, he is quite a sweary person. And I've had a lot of feedback about this word wasn't considered a swear word until such and such a day. And I just thought, says the people who wrote it down, but how long was it used before it was written down? I'm sorry, I don't buy it. And there's a brilliant book that came out in 2024 called Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. And it's set in ancient Greek, and his ancient Greek characters, he's an Irish chap. His ancient Greek characters talk like a couple of Irish guys bantering going to the pub. And I had the joy of listening to the audiobook rather than I bought the book. I also bought the audiobook and listened to the audiobook on my way to and from work. And actually the author narrates the audiobook with this brilliant Irish accent. So you've got this story set in ancient Greece, narrated by this broad, beautiful Irish accent, where these guys are cussing like you would not believe, often going for a bit of a bevy. He doesn't call it a bit of a bevy, but it's basic. Essentially, that happens. And, the feedback I would have got from people if I'd have written that was, well, they didn't talk like that in those days. Well, how do you know? Two blokes would have had a banter together. Two best mates would have insulted each other, bounced cuss words off each other. And, that the vibe was there. And that book is just fantastic and a brilliant example of how it doesn't have to be exactly bang on for it to be really meaningful and for it to give you a different taste of history.
Yeah.
Because I think that those relationships between friends are very formally explored quite often in historical fiction, when banter would have happened throughout the ages, particularly banter between blokes who'd had a few wines in those days, wines and olives, and but it was brilliantly done. So I think maybe less with some of my books that are out at the moment, but if the Prendergast Brothers ever sees the light of day and is published, I've got some quite choice kind of interactions going on in that one that maybe they might be a little bit sort of more contemporary leaning, but my argument is that you can't say just because something was written down on such and such a date that word was not used for hundreds of years before it was written down, because it could well have been used in that context. It's just that nobody managed to write it down in some official capacity.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. How should we know? Since we're talking about a class of people who didn't write history so to
Yep.
speak. Yeah, absolutely. And you said you are quite a stickler. Do you agree with one other author said? She said she's doing research quite meticulously, and she said it was about cycling clubs in the 19th century, and she said for women, and she said in this particular area it didn't exist, but it could have existed.
Mm-hmm.
So
So, if it, if it could have existed, then it possibly did exist at some point somewhere.
yeah.
So, I think that there's a lot of things that don't exist until somebody writes them down.
Yeah.
But they could have existed for however long before then.
Yeah.
So, I think that again, it's that historical record, isn't it? So, historical record's not always totally accurate. It's not always bang on, I think. And, if things are in the newspapers, if you're looking through historical newspapers, they're quite often erroneous as well. The information in them is not always bang on either. And you can read two newspapers doing the same story and they've given somebody a different name or a different age or, so I think you've got to, when it comes to any sort of research, there's got to be that critical fabulation that I talked about earlier on, that what are the gaps and is this likely that this could have happened? Because, just because it's not been written down doesn't mean it didn't happen, or it couldn't have. It doesn't mean it was an impossibility if it wasn't written down and recorded somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Ladies, anything else you would like our listeners to know about your books, about history, about research, about writing? What would you like to share?
So much, but I can't think of anything succinct.
For me, when it comes to writing, just how much better your end product is with some really massive quality editing, which is boring and it takes a long time. But it's not boring if you really get stuck in and you start to see a difference happening. And feedback from other people is really, really valid, I think, as a writer, because writing's a really solitary activity and it shouldn't be. And with sort of quality feedback from people who know writing, your writing can only get stronger. And I think that, knowing that it shouldn't be necessarily a solitary activity is going to make writers kind of setting out kind of understand that process, because as a published author, you if you get an agent, you go through rounds of editing with your agent, and then it goes to a publisher, and then you have rounds of editing with publishers, and that editing process, even when you finished editing, people are still going to edit because it has to be what they want it to be. And another thing as well is that lots of writers deem it necessary to be published by a huge publisher, but quite often that could take away your ownership of what you're writing. I've known writers get very upset because they have I know a lady who she won a competition. She was going to get her writing published by a big publisher, and she was quite upset because basically they'd ripped apart what she'd written and got her to re-edit it until the story didn't look like her own anymore. Because they wanted a particular way of doing it, because they knew what sells. And so I think going into writing and knowing who you are as a writer and being true to yourself as a writer, are you going in it to be a best-selling commercial writer, or are you writing the things that you actually really care about? How much ownership do you want over it? And there's a lot of sort of soul searching, I think, that goes on when you become a writer. And I don't think anybody warns you about that in the beginning.
Yeah. True words. Caroline, what about you? What would you like our listeners to know, which we haven't covered?
I guess for this particular project, I'm going to put in a plug for playing What If. Yeah, I mentioned that I think Sherman was neurodivergent, as am I. Do I know that he was? No. Is there any way to be sure? No. Anybody who tries to say authoritatively what his neurotype was is at best wrong, right? And more likely just fantastically arrogant. But in putting together my understanding of who he was so that I could write Gwen, I assumed that he was. I assumed, okay, for the sake of argument, let's assume that this hunch that I have is right. So what does that tell me about why he was doing the things that he was doing, why he said what he said, what was really going on behind these sort of stranger, contradictory elements? Do I know that any of that is correct? No. But I did end up getting a way of understanding who he was that's at least internally consistent. It makes sense, and it's different than anything that I've read before. So, I mean, I might end up writing a nonfiction book about him at some point, because, I mean, it was what Emma said. You just get all this stuff together and you want to share.
Yeah.
And if I do, what that book will be, let's play What If. This is what Sherman looks like if we assume that he was neurodivergent. And then readers who read that, they may or may not agree with me. Other scholars may or may not agree with me. I may or may not be right. But that will be another dimension from which he can be seen and understood.
Yeah.
And it will add to the overall. There are writers who assume that he was a narcissist, which, by the way, a lot of autists are initially misdiagnosed as being narcissistic. But anyway, there are people who think that he was a narcissist. There are people who think that he was a this or a that. So I just want to put a plug in for, not jumping in with your pet theory and assuming that you're right, because you're not, even if you are a big deal scholar. But play What If and see what happens, and then tell the rest of us. So
Interesting. Something to look forward to. So you have you're booked for that again. You have to come on then. Absolutely. I mean, same goes for Emma. She has to be back on the show.
Oh, definitely. I'd love to.
Good. Ladies, it was so lovely talking to you. Thanks for your patience. I really appreciate it. It was wonderful talking to you. Please wait for me in the green room. I will be with you shortly.
Okay.
Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guests and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I do hope you will tune in for another episode. Until next time.